If you don't see an increase in information from the very simple cells that began in the evolutionary tree, if you don't see an increase in information, you're never going to get to man. You're never going to take that next step up, because there is a massive amount of information that must be added to the DNA of simple organisms in order to get to man. Massive. It boggles the mind. DNA information questions. Where did the information in DNA come from? There has never been any example of information increasing in DNA through natural processes, which is demanded by evolution. But there's never been an example of it. There's no known process. There's no idea of where that could come from, other than an awesome God, an amazing intelligence that placed that information there. Dean Kenyon was an evolutionist. In fact, when he wrote his textbook on chemical evolution, it was the theory that won the day as to how some of these complex biological organisms could have existed, that somehow these could have evolved through a chemical evolutionary process. I want you to hear his testimony of what happened as he began to look at the evidence and began to doubt his own theory, as many other scientists did.
The problem of biological origins has, for a very long time, I would say, has been a real deep interest to me, just because of the scale of the problem, the importance of it. Where did we come from? Why are we here? All that kind of question, probed from the point of view of natural science.
During the late 1960s and throughout the 70s and early 80s, Dean Kenyon was one of the leading chemical evolutionary theorists in the world. And like others in his field, he was trying to explain how life on Earth began through a purely natural process.
In 1969, Kenyon co-authored an important book on the origin of life.
Gary Steinman and myself thought that if we were to pull together all of the lines of empirical evidence that had accumulated by the mid to late 60s in one continuous argument, we were very enthusiastic about the possibilities for explaining the origin of the main life-building elements.
Faced with mounting difficulties in his own theory and a growing body of scientific data about the importance of DNA, Kenyon was forced to confront the absolute necessity of genetic information.
The more I thought about the alternative that was being presented in the criticism, and the enormous problem that all of us who worked on this field had neglected to address, the problem of the origin of genetic information itself, then I really had to reassess my whole position regarding origins.
For Dean Kenyon, a new question became the focus of his search for life's origin. What was the source of the biological information in DNA?
If one could get at the origin of the messages, the encoded messages within the living machinery, then you would really be on to something far more intellectually satisfying than this chemical evolution theory.
Yet Kenyon realized that he faced a narrowing set of options. By the 1970s, most researchers had rejected the idea that the information necessary to build the first cell originated by chance alone. To understand why, consider the difficulty of generating just 2 lines of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters onto a tabletop. Then considered that the specific genetic instructions required to build the proteins in even the simplest one-celled organism would fill hundreds of pages of printed text. Chance, natural selection, and his own theory of self-organization had all failed to explain the origin of genetic information. Now Kenyon saw only one alternative.
We have not the slightest chance of a chemical evolutionary origin for even the simplest of cells. So the concept of the intelligent design of life was immensely attractive to me and made a great deal of sense, as it very closely matched the multiple discoveries in molecular biology.
In the years since Kenyon's rejection of chemical evolution, science has revealed the details of an entire system of information processing that bears the hallmarks of intelligent design.
Dean Kenyon faced the reality that we're talking about today. Where did that information come from? And it's more than just the information. If I went to Norway, for example, and I had the information on how to build a Hummer, and I took that to the Norwegian group that I was working with, and I brought them these instructions in English, what's the problem? They speak Norwegian. They're not going to be able to read it. Now think about the fact it's not just the information that's there. You have to have little biological machines that build the cell that can read that information. Where did that ability come from? And you can go on and wonder, how could that happen via evolution? It can't. It's not just the information. It's biological machines that can read it, respond to it, and build the cell and do the jobs that they're required to do within the cell. It's beyond imagination. It boggles the mind. Well, the summary on information is this. Evolution requires genetic changes, increases in genetic information. It's virtually impossible. Never been seen. We don't know of any process where that can happen. The only thing we see is sorting of information as it's distributed. Even in the human population, genetic information is distributed, or a loss of information occurs. Never an increase. There's never been even a micro increase in genetic information ever recorded, ever discovered in biology. Not there. Impossible. Well, here's the next thing I'd love for you to say. It's this. The origin of life is God, not chance. When you ask the evolutionist, how did it all start? Okay, well, let's say there's something to this evolution. How did it begin? No idea. We really have no idea how it began. I'm going to show you a clip in a minute of Richard Dawkins. Right before he says what he does in this clip, he says in this interview, we really have no idea how life started. Well, the origin of life is God, not chance. There was a theory out there called spontaneous generation, which ruled the scientific world for a number of years. It was the belief that in this primordial early pond, there were chemicals there and heat and perhaps a lightning strike that struck a cell that was not living, and all of a sudden this cell became a living cell. And that began the whole process of evolution that we see today, from this one simple cell that was struck by a lightning bolt and became this living cell from a non-living cell. Now, that might have sounded feasible for some people before they realized how complex those one-celled organisms are. They're not a blob of Jell-O. They're not at all. They're incredibly complex. Evolution was based on the premise of spontaneous generation, the emergence of life from non-living or inanimate matter. The problem is this. Spontaneous generation has never been observed or induced. Scientists have never seen it. And even though they've tried to create it in the laboratory, they've tried to take something that was not living and make it into a living cell. And remember, the model breaks down right there because you have intelligent scientists trying to take something that's not living and make it into a living cell. They could never do it. It's never been it's never happened in the laboratory. And as scientists began to work on this problem, they realized the whole theory fails. It's mind-boggling to believe that life in all of its complexity could have originated in this way, life from a primordial pond. It is more plausible that a great builder with a master plan would be required for such a task. It's mind-boggling. That's how I picture mind-boggling, looking like that, like how could that happen? But this doesn't seem to bother evolutionists. They hold on to the theory, even though it's a theory in crisis, even though it's a theory that it can be compared to a dying corpse. The facts aren't there. But they hold on to this theory. The likelihood of the formation of life from non-living matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 zeros after it. For example, 1,000 has 3 zeros after it. The odds of life happening from an inanimate, non-living thing is 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. It is big enough, Fred Hoyle says, one of the greatest scientists in the history of England, to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. The odds against evolution are so great. If you look at it objectively, it would bury the theory of evolution. The chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. Absolutely impossible. You would never believe anything like that could happen. And yet, it's being taught to our kids in public schools. It's being taught to our students in college, in master's levels classes, in doctoral level classes. That's exactly what the assumptions are in evolution that are being taught to our students.